With 15 different subclasses in Destiny, it can be hard to know what's best for PvP, so I teamed up with two of the best players in the world to rank them in a tier list. I'm going to walk through each level from F tier subclasses struggling right now up to the best ones in S tier. Starting with F tier, these are putting yourself at a disadvantage. It doesn't mean you can't do well with them, but the harder your opponent, the worse these will end up, and we're starting with Strand Warlock. It's in a bit of a weird spot because historically, Bungie has wanted new shiny things to drop overpowered. Doing that draws people in, which leads to growth. The catch though is that when they did it with Stasis, it was so obnoxious that everyone grew a hatred for it, and I think that's why Strand shipped so differently. In Warlock's case, it's actually kind of underpowered. There's of course some cool abilities like Woven Mail giving damage resist, the ability to suspend your opponents midair, or literally being Spider-Man, but they're pretty niche in their own regard. The melee is underwhelming, Threadlings don't have meaningful impact in most situations, and the super actually whiffs a decent amount. Although I'm glad we didn't see overpowered abilities like when Stasis dropped, the Broodweaver isn't a strong meta pick at the moment, especially when you're facing smarter opponents. Unfortunately, the next one on our list is also Strand. While Titan's Berserker is great in PvE, the synergies don't quite apply in PvP. Their grenades are lackluster, the Spider-Man fantasy is nothing compared to what Hunters have, and the benefits you can proc through its aspects and fragments are just a bit too niche for Crucible. I'll admit, suspending people from a barricade is pretty comical, especially when you combine it with something like Khepri's, but again, just very niche. The triple melee is pretty interesting with how fast it can swipe, whether that be for a melee battle or just using it for movement, but yeah, there's not much else to write home about it. For a super that's great in PvE, it's hard to choose this one over things like Thunder Crash or Bubble in PvP, so it'll be interesting to see what Bungie does over the course of time, considering there's 2 less fragments in this one compared to the light subclasses. Now, before we move on to the D tier, I do want to mention that while much of this is my own commentary, it wouldn't be possible without getting the input from Gold and Defizzle. These guys rack up hundreds of wins in trials every single weekend, helping people go flawless. They've seen every meta in Destiny and know exactly what works and, more importantly, what tends to crumble against better players. A lot of what I say is thanks to their experience, and as we head into the D tier, these subclasses aren't quite at the same disadvantage as F, but they're still not your best bet. Solar Titan is similar to Strand in that its aspects and fragments make for some great times in PvE, but a lot of their synergies don't translate into the Crucible. Slamming waves of fire on the ground is flashy and all, but almost every part of this kit fails against skilled opponents. The Hammer of Soul super is amazing for quick play, but being the slowest charging cooldown, it's rarely there for a clutch moment. Burning Maul might be faster, but for a reason. It's not going to work against those tougher players. The shoulder charge was always a staple of this build, but with the nerf to energy usage, it's not quite the same, especially when you've got Void and Arc doing way more. The reason this one makes the D cut instead of F tier is because a lot more exotics do elevate Solar compared to Strand as of today. The Path of Burning Steps, for example, was recently buffed and has me pretty excited. Now for the first Hunter subclass, we're unfortunately talking about Arc, which was a long-time fan favorite. Before subclasses were refreshed with 3.0, your neutral game was a big reason to play a build, and Arc was amazing for it. As time went on though, this philosophy sort of flipped, with oppressive abilities getting more and more attention. Because of this, Arc Hunter has been struggling to keep up, and while they did bring Blink back, it's not like it was enough to make this an S tier pick. The disorienting melee is still one of the strongest out there, and I gotta say, the Arc Staff super is crazy strong. There's nothing that feels quite as good as crushing a Bubble Titan with it. But I do think Arc was augmented better on the other characters. Now with those 2 more rankings down, it's time we talk about C tier. These ones have a bit more potential in the Crucible with what their synergies can bring to the table between their aspects, fragments, and abilities. Arc Warlock, for example, makes pretty darn good use of its fragments. Plus, it has this. How many of you have been destroyed by this thing from what feels like a football field away? You want to talk oppression versus neutral game? Well, this thing is all about that. People running Arc Soul with their Rift, shooting you at every waking moment, nagging you more than a parent to get your homework done, like it just doesn't end on this subclass. The Landfall super acting like a Titan smash, this is where things start to spice up in the video. The kit on Warlock fits a lot of playstyles, and although some things are common to all characters, like grenades for example, the locks make great use of them. Having such strong class abilities with a great melee that are all amplified by those aspects and fragments combined with 2 really different supers opens the door to a lot of different players. It's got plenty of different exotics to pair with, and it's also very user-friendly to begin with. Like, you can hop in and immediately feel how well balanced this class is. Except for that stupid melee. Behemoth brings the first stasis ranking on the tier list with Titan. It's an ironic situation because you know how I said Bungie likes to introduce things as overpowered? Well, this was insane. The super was unstoppable, and the movement tech brought Titan to a whole new level, but after many nerfs, we'd say it floats right around the middle nowadays. Unlike the Warlock we just talked about, if you step into this as an absolute beginner, it can feel kind of frustrating. But the more you get used to the toolkit, the more synergies you realize exist. Playing against 3 behemoths, for example, it suddenly becomes very clear just how hard they can be to stop. In fact, I'd say that's the one thing that holds them back. They kind of do need power in numbers in order to try and compete with the upper subclasses later in this video. I personally still like the melee for movement, and Titan skating right out of that Cryoclasm slide is very nice as well. Even as a C tier ranking, I still recommend people give it a shot for the enjoyment factor. Now back to Hunter, we're going to talk about Void. Originally popular for the Spectral Blade super, they eventually became hated for their invisibility. A good portion of last year was ruled by a single PvE build, combining Omnioculus with invisibility to create insane damage resistance on a target nearly impossible to see was very oppressive. Just take a look at these 2 images right here and tell me if you can find the Hunter. Nowadays, you lose your radar when you go invisible, and the damage resist is much more balanced. The smokes are still great, and Hunters in general are just incredibly fun to play thanks to their movement. Whether it's a dodge or a slam, the controversial Stompies exotic, or just the fact that high mobility characters are harder to play against, they'll always be a contender. The Spike Nade continues to be one of the most underrated ones out there, and in my opinion, you can still do work pretty easily on Void Hunter. With the first half down though, we're heading into the upper subclasses starting with B tier. This is where you can notice the difference at all skill levels. They're just as fun in quick play, but also hold up against better players. Shadebinders who know what they're doing can be some of the toughest Warlocks to play against. Because Stasis was nerfed so many times, people kind of forgot just how effective freezing can still be, and Warlocks are outstanding at it. Their melee, for example, when you get the timing down for that thing and use patience in your gameplay, you can be insanely hard to counter. Pairing it with the Cold Snap Grenade is deadly, and this is where synergies between fragments and aspects start to really gel. Having aggressive heat-seeking on your ice abilities to make your opponents immobile is the ultimate trump card. The ability to anchor certain areas of a map with a turret, a super with a blast radius larger than Destiny's content vault, and so many ways to shorten your cooldowns is something people should never pass up. Not to mention, synergies with certain weapons like Headstone bring it to another level as well, and it's truly an excellent subclass. Going back to Hunters again, they do Strand the best. Some of the most exciting gameplay I've seen comes from this subclass. I personally asked Gold to run some mayhem just to show off that true Spider-Man fantasy. This subclass gives a new definition to what neutral game can be. I talked earlier about how that's less meaningful nowadays on Arc Hunter compared to the past, but Strand Hunter does it in a very special way. With their ability to close enormous gaps in quick fashion, what would be considered a neutral kit ends up working for both defense and offense. Using your slam when a super's coming at you versus using it to attack someone is the perfect example. Having a double grapple and a melee for movement, it sort of completes the full spectrum of being able to go up in the air, down when you need to, and across. One downside to this is the super can feel good against weaker players, but then lose pretty often to other players who know how to counter it. Bungie's recent buff will probably help this out, and I know a lot of people are probably going to argue that this is more of an A tier option. Void Warlock is a subclass that continues to impress me. That purple buddy you can shoot from your rift with a crazy name called Child of the Old Gods? Yeah, it's insane. Making use of Devour much easier than the others, stealing the blink jump from Destiny 1 Hunters, the list goes on. Their kit is useful for both aggressive gameplay, but also for punishing aggressive opponents who hold the W key too much. Charging grenades adds a layer of depth to everything that you do. The Nova Bomb charging faster than most of the other supers is really handy, and a melee that still catches people off guard with its knockback. Most people rock the Ophidian Aspects exotic for handling on weapons, and I totally get it. I do too. Maybe the Transversives for movement, but if you really want to elevate the blink ability, I highly recommend Astrocyte Verse. It makes for super addicting gameplay, and between the Void Fragments and Warlock abilities, they're a very strong contender. At this point, we're heading into the A tier rankings, which really opens the door to capabilities that are both easy to get used to for new players and highly effective against smarter opponents. Solar Hunter is exactly that. A perfect example of where high skill players can especially shine with its toolkit without compromising the barrier to entry for newer players. Whether it's triggering on your mark for incredible weapon boosts from a simple dodge or having Radiant on command if you want to use the dive, the Hunter aspects are great. 4 different knives to choose from on your melee, you can fit a ton of different playstyles like the Solar Wombo combo or just nailing that weighted knife headshot. The super gives you plenty of options, whether it's the 6-shooter Golden Gun in quick play, Blade Barrage for shutdowns in trials, or a happy medium with the 3-shot Goldie. Trip mines are some of the best in the game, especially when you pair them with the young Ahamkara's exotic. This build is becoming more and more popular across gunslingers, and honestly the subclass just feels good right out the gate, providing an avenue for high-skilled players to really showcase their mechanical ability. Now another A tier option is Hunter again, but this time on ice. I don't want to say Revenant is slept on because you see plenty of them out there, but we really wanted to highlight just how versatile it is. Hunter's #1 problem for ages was being in the air without a way to come down, and this introduced Shatter Dive as a solution to that, not replacing your dodge. Similar to Strand, Stasis is good for both neutral and offensive play on the Hunter. People tend to say the super is bad, but it's effective at zoning, and if you know what you're doing, can be used in nearly any situation. The shurikens may not be the greatest, but running Duskfield grenades are incredibly strong for controlling engagements, and so many fragments support that style of play. Top tier Revenants can be extremely difficult to manage because of this, and capping it off is one of the most fun exotics in the game, Mask of Baccharis. Adding teleport and a damage boost to their fingertips and you've got yourself an easy A tier ranking. With Hunters securing that spot, it's time to move on to the best of the best in today's meta. S tier subclasses are objectively better in what they're able to do. They work right out of the box for new players and can be so strong you have to play especially clever to counter them. I talked about how Gold and Defizzle help people go flawless every weekend. Well, you can watch exactly what it takes just by tuning into their streams. Every Friday to Monday, they're live on Twitch and then bring their gameplay over to YouTube throughout the week. Simply watching them in action, you can see why these next set of subclasses are just a level above the rest. Starting out, we have the Void Titan. The strength of this subclass has stood the test of time because even through every little nerf in the past year, they've stayed near the top. Barricades are already strong as it is, but giving a self-regenerating overshield with extra damage resistance is wild. Grenades that can charge up to 3 times faster, extended melee distance with extra damage to win your trades while getting healed, all thanks to Echo of Leeching, and you can see how Titan makes use of its fragments on a whole new level. Something people sleep on is controlled demolition, saying it's a PvE aspect, but truth be told, the volatile explosions from a shield bash have clutched so many 1v3s for me it's unfair. I'd say it's a good thing the shoulder charge now takes up energy so you can't spam it for movement, but it's still worth it over the shield throw. Then you've got the everlasting bubble. Whether it's the ending of a trials round or even just taking on a whole squad by yourself in quick play, it's always going to be a top choice with its fastest cooldown. If you're ever bored of it, you can just rock Sentinel for some fun in quick play too. Just based on how the Void Kit works, I think it'll always be a viable option on Titan. Solar Warlock. Icarus Dash is likely one of the best movement techs to ever meet Destiny, and once Bungie reworked the Solar subclass to use it more, the floodgates opened up. Combining it with eating grenades for a whole new dimension to your fights in the air, top tier Dawnblades are so hard to deal with. Having easy access to maximum airborne effectiveness, then a dive alternative to the Rift makes for some pretty dynamic gameplay. A melee that shoots fire like Mario but heat seeks, becoming radiant from a distance, being a support class for your teammates, it's just such a well-rounded kit. You can choose between a defensive style waiting for your opponents to make their mistake or control the pace with aggression, they'll both work. Similar to Void Titan, you can also choose what super you want, whether that's the fast charging Well of Radiance or the offensive Dawnblade throwing fire through the sky. Ophidians are still one of the most popular exotics out there because of how good they make weapons feel, and you get that on this kit. I personally think this subclass offers one of the highest skill ceilings out there with respect to mechanical ability, so if you've never given it a shot, it can be really fun to watch yourself improve the more you play it. An absolute S tier option in my opinion, but with the final pick of the day, we're taking a bit of a risk. As I'm writing this, Arc Titan is without a doubt a king in the Crucible, but Bungie just announced that they're nerfing it, and that's in effect as you watch this video. Strikers have been the safest aggressive option for a long time now. They've got that extra melee distance just like Void with the higher damage and healing, all thanks to Knockout. They've had Chain Lightning by their side for a long time with the Dune Marcher's exotic, and now they can rock Antius wards for immunity when they're sliding at you. Ballistic Slam and Falcon Punch are certainly fun melees, but the shoulder charge is so great for movement and the ultimate shotgun follow-up. Lightning grenades are arguably at the top when it comes to PvP, and they're enhanced on Titan. Barricades are always going to be a strong utility when in the right hands, and pairing all of that with Thunder Crash gave a recipe to take over. Which, by the way, for that super, try to pop it in the middle of a shoulder charge and you'll see how much faster it can get. Now, the nerfs that Bungie made targeted 3 features. They increased the cooldown on that super, changing it from what's called a tier 3 timer into tier 2. It can sometimes be hard to remember what all the supers are at, so I've actually made this table for you in case you want to screenshot it. The second thing they did was reduce the bonus damage on Knockout's melee. I don't think that'll move the needle on what people use, but we'll have to see if more Juggernauts start to pop up. Lastly, they made barricades take longer to get, and since Titans tend to run high resilience already, I think it'll be noticeable. Utility kickstarts will probably still make it manageable, and ultimately we'll have to see. I could take the easy way out and say that Striker's now in A tier because of all of this, especially since Bubble might take over, but I've left it in S for now. With the final rankings done, I'd like to present a $1,000 tournament that I hosted, putting all 3 of these classes against each other in a 10 challenge gauntlet. With both PvP and PvE competitions, watch this to see the biggest project that I've ever made.